Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Watercolour for Beginners. Now, I've been banging on about how brilliant these rounded point brushes are, and today we're going to put them to the test. I've been saying how versatile and wonderful they are, so we're going to see how much we can do, whether we can paint the thinnest line possible, the thickest line, and then we're going to start moving on to some brush strokes that are the basis of everything I paint. So get your kit ready and we're going to make a start. Okay, so we're going to be using the Rounded Point Series 60 size 4 brush again. It's probably my favourite brush, the one I use the most, and we'll be back dipping into our cadmium red paint again. So we are going to look at what the brush can do today, and as always, the golden rule, we start with a wet brush, and the whole point of that is so we can achieve a nice point on the end of the brush, because we're looking at how thin a line we can paint first off. So I'm going to get just a little bit of paint on the end of my brush. Now, when you get paint on the brush, there's quite often the case that you can end up with a big blob of paint, a bit like that, and that doesn't really help matters when we're trying to be all delicate and dainty. So just twizzle the bristles sort of on the edge of the palette to just remove the excess paint. Because your brush is wet, it means that it will run really nicely with what you've got. So let's have a go. So I want to make sure that the tip of the brush is only just touching the page, and because we need a bit of control, I'm going to sort of use my hand as a bit of a guide, and I'm going to hover it just, there we go, and let's see. Ooh, not bad. So that is me holding my brush angled fairly low, a bit like how you'd hold a pen or a pencil, I suppose. And that's not bad, it's not bad. But let's also see if I hold the brush a little differently. If I hold it really vertically like that, and then, oh look, that is a very nice, smooth, consistent, thin line. And the way I'm doing that is I'm using the ball of my fist sat there, just the tip of the brush touching, and then I'm using that to do all the movement. So that was all done with a lovely wet brush. It meant the paint ran off it really smoothly, rather like a felt tip pen, I suppose. So we've got the thinnest brush stroke we can achieve. What's the thickest one? So instead of using just the finest tip of the brush, we want to use the full length of the bristles here. So we're going to get the full length of the bristles coated in paint. Now my paint has been nicely woken up. As always, we need a little bit of water to wake everything up, and we're getting the full length of the bristles coated, and then the brush is angled very low to the page, you can see there, and we're just going to have a go squishing the whole bristle down and just drawing it across the page. Now we're going pretty well, but quite soon we're going to sputter out. Look at that. Ugh. And the reason for that is, however well intentioned you are with getting lots and lots of water on your brush, you're using so much of the bristles there that it really can't handle much more. But not a problem. All you need to do is get your brush wet, really nice and wet, and then smooth it along. Just once or twice, not too many times, and you will start to get a lovely, smooth, thick, broad line without having added any more colour there, because you're always looking for an ever so slightly translucent feel with watercolour. It just lights up the page and makes your painting really interesting. Okay, so we've got fine point and broad stroke using the full length of the brush, and it's amazing to think that that was done just with the size 4 brush. Okay, so we've got a thick line, we've got a thin line, but now we're going to start thinking about the kind of things we want to paint. Now, I have written a book called New Botanical Painting, and I am a specialist in flower painting, and throughout my book I look at lots of lovely flowers and foliage and leaves, and nearly every single, no actually I'm going to go out on a limb and say every single plant and flower in here starts life with what we call a tapered line. So let's have a look at what on earth I mean by a tapered line. And also, whether you're interested in flower painting or not, and you want to paint other things, this tapered line is the basis of so many things. So getting our brush nice and wet and covered in paint, but then also doing the little twizzle on the side of the palette, we're going to paint thin to thick to thin in one fluid motion. Now let's do that again. So you want to really look at the tip of the brush, starting there, and I'm holding the brush quite vertically here, just touching the page and moving, and I'm just going to squish the bristles down and then control it off the page there. So I have my brush really quite vertically for these nice little slimline tapered lines. However, there is another way. So let's get our brush really nice and coated in paint again and just twizzle the bristles, dab it off the side. Now I can hold the brush much more like a pen, and let's have a go now. Starting with the tip and squishing it down and controlling it back up. And this gives you a far more quirky, squashy, unsymmetrical, or asymmetrical I suppose, shape, but it does give you the similar thin to thick to thin that we're looking for. So there's two ways of achieving your tapered line, and I will say the more confident you get with these lines, the smoother they will become. So this is the main stroke that I'm going to be coming back to again and again and again. Now, we're going to learn one more thing today, if I haven't overloaded you enough already. We're going to take this tapered line and we are going to see how we can put it on a curve. And we're first going to look at a C curve. Now, the letter C as opposed to the ocean. So I've got a nice wet and paint covered brush. I've got a nice fine tip. This is all looking good. I'm going to start with the tip of my brush over the page, and I'm going to curl around with the tip, and as I come down I'm going to squash the bristles, and then I'm going to control it back. Yeah, looks like a C. Great, let's try again, shall we? So the tip, and if any of you have ever done calligraphy, squashing that down, this might be rather familiar. And it's all about controlling the last bit. It's very easy. Let's see what happens if we don't control the last bit. Squash it down and whoops. Oh, that wasn't actually too bad actually. But you know, it's all about control because we want to be able to, well, control where the shape is going. But this just means that we've got the fine tips on either end and a nice broad middle, just like these lines here. Now a C curve at times won't actually look much like a C. It's just more about the fact that the beginning and end is sort of coming in from the same side. A C curve when we're painting leaves and things might look a little bit more like that. So the tiniest bit of C, but it's still a lovely curve and we've got a lovely broad middle. And there will be other times where it starts off nice and thin and then we need to sort of waggle the brush around and come back at it. So a C curve takes on many forms, but that is a really useful stroke to learn. So starting off with a fine tip of the brush, squashing it down, and really don't be scared to squash that bristle right down into the page because that's what it's there for. These are synthetic bristle brushes and I always recommend a synthetic bristle because it has a real bounce to it and a resilience and a stiffness actually that I find not all natural sable head brushes do. So this is why they're my choice. We've done a C curve and now it's time for an S curve. So I fill up my page towards the bottom. So an S curve, pretty self-explanatory, but we just need to make sure we start with thin, thick, thin. And there we have a little S. So let's try that again. And you can play around with how you hold the brush. I don't want to sort of dictate to you that there's only one way to do it. But the most important thing is that you're playing with a fine tip of the brush, squashing it down in the middle and coming off with a nice controlled stroke with a fine tip there. Okay, so this is a really important part of getting confident and comfortable with really making that brush work for you. So the rounded point brush, as I said, this one is a size 4. It's a really versatile one. I recommend just playing around with the one brush that you've got, and then you'll be able to see how much potential you've got, and it means that you'll be able to paint loads of pictures with just the one brush and not have to keep on sort of getting another brush in and getting into this brush and that brush. It just means you can take your time with it, really. So that is all we've got for today. We've got the thin lines, the thickest lines, and then putting it all together with the tapered line, and then putting it onto a C curve and onto an S curve. And if you can get confident with that, then you are ready for the next stage. And there you have it. So I hope now you're really starting to build up a little bit of confidence with the brush and with the paint and the water and what it's starting to do on the page in front of you. I can't stress enough that the more happy and relaxed you feel about watercolour painting, the better it'll be. So keep going, keep practicing, and we will see you next time. But for now, if you like what you saw, like below, or leave me a comment to let me know what you'd like to see next. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and you won't miss an episode. Okay,